One. And so Microschools Network is we provide resources for small school owners, for educators, and also for parents to find out about the really great scope and depth of these schools that are all around the world, from Montessori to experiential based to neurodivergent. They're really serving all different kinds of populations and all different kinds of communities. And the great thing about our site is that you can find different filters and you can find schools. And yeah, we're solely devoted to really making these unconventional learning environments conventional. So today I'm really pleased to have Lizette Valles here, and she's one of our longtime collaborators, a friend of our work, and she's a great proponent of the microschool movement. So she's got herself a school out of LA. She's got another resource consulting company as well that helps, and then she also recently started the California Microschool Collective, which is it's a great resource for all of those schools based in California and more. I'm sure Lizette can tell us a little bit about it, but I'll turn it over to you, Lizette. If you just want to let us know about yourself. I think this is such an important topic for all of us. And also, before we start, I certainly invite everyone to write comments in the chat, unmute yourself if you have a question. We want this to be as engaging and direct as possible, so it doesn't have to be a formal speaker. So just interject if you have questions, please.
There you go. All righty. I'm so glad to be here with everyone. Thank you for joining. So this topic is huge, and it could easily be like a 2, 3 day PD. But I'm going to try my very best to condense this to about, a little less than an hour that we have together. And I want to honor your time. So a little bit about kind of just making the most of this time together. There is a workbook that accompanies this workshop. So I think Whitney is going to hopefully drop that in the chat.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, so that'll be available to you in a bit. But feel free to go ahead and fill that out, or you could look at it at your leisure, but it really is a great resource. So, yeah, a bit about myself, some context so you know where I'm coming from. I have been a teacher for almost 20 years. And I started off teaching middle school at a private school. And then I became a librarian and a high school English teacher for a while. And I transitioned into homeschooling when the pandemic hit and eventually opened up a micro school. And my background is pretty unique. So I have personally dealt with quite a deal of trauma. My mom was a single mom. My husband and I, well, to backtrack, part of my origin story is that I actually never met my dad until um, I was 38 years old. And it's very difficult to even say dad because it was an assault that happened to my mom. So you can only imagine all of the different components that have made up my life that have brought me to this point. And I'm also a foster adoptive mom. So I adopted my husband and I actually, we adopted our son back in 2017. He's 10 years old now. He came to us at 22 months. And then we fostered a little boy that was on the path to adoption. And then he was reunified. So that has been, um, you know, quite a thing, especially with so much uncertainty. So there is a lot there, but all of that to say that I am with you. I am a parent, I'm an educator, and I'm a generational cycle breaker, meaning that I have taken all of my lived experiences and have I want to say I have tried my very best to turn ashes into beauty. I'm a person of faith, so that plays a huge role in my life. But all of this now brings us to this point, to building a trauma-informed and reparative schooling model. So this is a framework for supporting the development of healing-centered schools. And we're moving away from the word trauma or the term trauma-informed to more of this healing-centered approach. So I might use these interchangeably. But yes, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat as we go along. And let's get started. Alrighty, so what you'll learn in this workshop, and Whitney, if you wouldn't mind kind of just giving me like a, you know, 5 minute heads up, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. I think I'm going to email I couldn't attach the file. So I'll just email all of our colleagues that have signed up the PDFs and things, the resources. So you can check your inbox if you'd like to do that in the next couple of minutes.
Awesome, thank you. So what you'll learn in this workshop is you'll gain an understanding of what trauma-informed care is. You'll learn how to decode challenging behaviors. I firmly believe that it is a responsibility of adults to decode these challenging behaviors, because if we don't, oftentimes children who are labeled as defiant or hard-headed or stubborn, they get kicked out of class or they might get expelled. So it's up to us to decode these behaviors so they don't stand a chance of losing the opportunity to gain an education that they deserve. And so that is part of the microschooling movement. We're saying there's a place for you, and we are going to do our very best to decode these challenging behaviors. You'll learn how to differentiate between empathy and sympathy, apply the PACE and 5A needs approaches. You'll learn how to regulate the nervous system and address your own triggers. What's interesting is that oftentimes we shy away from our own triggers. So, for example, if there is a child who is really loud, that might be annoying, but there might be something else there for you to explore, or maybe a child that has shouted at you, and then you have your own type of meltdown because that child has disrespected you. So that is worth noting. What is it that is bothering you so much? Why is that trigger so triggering? So we're going to explore that. And then we'll have a breakout session with some role-playing scenarios and a time of reflection. So you'll leave today with practical tools you can start using immediately. Alrighty, what is a trauma-informed, restorative, and holistic model? I didn't just keep this to trauma-informed. I wanted to include the terms restorative and holistic because this is what the topic demands, truly. It needs to not only be trauma-informed, but we have to look at it from a restorative and holistic model as well, because there's so much. So for example, if you yell at your kids, the restorative practice is then to go ahead and close that loop with an apology. I'm sorry that I lost my cool with you. Then holistically, perhaps the child is lacking like something. Maybe the child is hungry. So, okay, maybe we're going to tap into like the physiology there, right? So it has to be trauma-informed, restorative, and holistic to ensure that all aspects are being touched upon. This model creates a safe and supportive environment by recognizing the impact of trauma, fostering healing through connection and accountability, and nurturing students' academic, social, emotional, and personal growth. Alrighty, so looking at our first section with trauma-informed practices. When we recognize the impact of trauma and foster a safe, predictable, and supportive learning environment, our students will most likely feel seen, heard, and valued. And you'll hear me say that a lot. I want to make sure that students, children, all people are seen, heard, and valued. Because if you gain nothing else from this workshop, the one thing that I do want you to walk away with is connection, connection, connection. What you say and what you do will not matter if the child does not feel connected to you. And I think we've all experienced that. When you have a lack of connection with someone, they could go ahead and try everything. And you're like, nope, I'm not feeling it, right? And that's exactly how kids respond as well. Looking at restorative practices, building relationships and addressing conflicts through connection, again, accountability and healing centered approaches rather than punishment. Um, so I grew up, I definitely got spanked as I was growing up. And truthfully, the only thing that I believe it taught me was to fear getting caught in whatever it is that I was doing. So whether that was staying up talking on the phone really late or getting home late, that was, and I didn't get spanked at that time, but I got yelled at as I became an adolescent and a teenager. And I just would shut out the noise. Okay, that's yelling. That's not for me. Um, Holistic development, supporting students' academic, social, emotional, and personal growth by integrating mindfulness, self-regulation strategies, and strengths-based learning experiences. And the strengths-based learning experiences is so important because when we tap into that which brings our children joy and confidence, then we're going to go ahead and reach them in a better way. If we start from a deficit-based approach, they shut down. Again, I have seen students that are really, really strong in English and maybe not so strong in math, and yet they're being essentially punished daily because their brains are having a hard time computing and understanding a subject matter that doesn't come easily to them. And so they feel less than. And when we feed into that narrative of them feeling less than all the time, eventually they might become adults who are in therapy because they feel less than. So this narrative carries over from childhood all the way to adulthood. And there's some of us that are in therapy at this very moment. I love therapy. I Everyone should be in therapy, but we're still working through some of those childhood wounds. And so we as educators, we as parents, we don't want to contribute to those childhood wounds. We want to be, again, a place of safety where kids have felt have connection, and we're modeling that self-regulation and offering co-regulation.
Lizette, can I stop you there just for a question? Because I think that it's really interesting the the example that you raised, because I have heard it from various parents who have said, oh, this teacher has they're so supportive of my child in this one subject matter, but the other subject matter in which they struggle with, they've been almost abusive because they expect the same sort of excellence or the same sort of achievement as they do in English, but at the same time they struggle in math. And so I'm kind of curious. I mean, maybe this is off topic, but how do you know, we want to provide we want to push our kids a bit, right? Or we want to push our students, but we also want to support them. So I guess it's a matter of finding the balance, or, I mean, what would you say?
Yeah, I think when we see that a child is struggling in a certain subject, I think the best approach is done with empathy. Like, hey, I know that this is so difficult. I'm so sorry that you're feeling this way. And yet it's the power. I just said yet. It's the power of yet.
Hmm.
You don't understand this. Your mind is having a difficult time wrapping around this topic, like, but you will, like, you don't understand this yet. So
Hmm.
it's always going there. Like there's hope. and you are not defective. You are
Hmm.
not then because you can't solve an equation. And you'll get there. And let's say that the child is not going at the pace that the adult would like them to go. I think that's a question more for the adult
Sure.
versus the child, right? Like we're there to be guides, we're there to support and to encourage. We are not there to force by any means necessary, right? Like you have to do this because a dysregulated nervous system actually does not have the ability to learn in that moment. So the more pressure and the more frustration, the less likely that that child will then be able to grasp the concept.
That's a great point.
Mhm. All righty, let's and if you have any more questions, again, I think Whitney can kind of feel them here. Um, all righty, so looking at some guiding principles of trauma-informed schools, honestly, I could have probably put like 100, but I didn't. I put 10 because well, for the sake of time and for, yeah, slides, a trillion slides. But the first is that felt safety, right? That I just mentioned. A lot of this is felt safety, a lot of this is connection, but also predictability. We want to foster environments where students feel physically and emotionally safe. Yesterday, I came across a video of an active shooter drill. And I think that micro schools are unique in the sense that sometimes we're in our bubble and we kind of forget that there's active shooter drills. Unless you're part of maybe you're a school within a school, then it might be different for your setting. But for the most part, micro schools by their very nature are small, right? They're intentionally small, innovative learning environments. And so we're not really thinking about active shooters. That's not really something that we're doing all the time or um, and and when I thought about that, like as I was looking at the video of the active shooter drill, I realized that children are not only needing emotional safety, they're also needing to feel physically safe at all times. So that might look like providing a TP. We have a little TP, and one of our students goes in there, and she's on the spectrum, and she loves being in there, and she'll close it up, and there's little lights inside, and there's a few pillows, and it's her calm corner. So thinking about what is going to make your students, your children feel safe, both physically and emotionally. And you could be that soft landing spot. Like you could be that safe space, but the environment could also be that safe space, and the culture of your school could be that safe space. A second guiding principle is connection before correction. So, building relationships first to support regulation and trust. If a child does not trust you, they will not feel safe with you. Number three, this is very important. We think of universal precautions as um, kind of only for the medical field, right? If you are dealing with like bloodborne pathogens or you need to give someone CPR, things like that. But universal precautions are also applicable in trauma-informed schooling models. So the assumption that we can have is that all students have experienced some level of trauma and then approach our interactions with them with care and consistency. So maybe someone has not been in a war-torn country and fled and come to, the US or to another country to be safe, right? That's kind of like an extreme example. Or maybe a child has not experienced time in foster care. Um, However, we don't know. all of the different types of traumas that children have experienced. And so that's why we operate with this mindset of having a universal precaution approach, because there's no gradation of suffering. We cannot grade someone's suffering like, oh, your suffering is an A minus and your suffering is a C. Or a lot of us do mastery base, right? Like or competency base. You haven't hit the competency for trauma in this, right? Like we can't do that. There's no scale, there's no gradation. So operating with that in mind. Number four, behavior as communication. Look beyond behavior to identify the unmet needs beneath it. So, for example, a child might be seeking autonomy or affection, and they might be acting out in certain ways that are confusing to us. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but really looking to see what is the unmet psychological need that that child is displaying with their behavior. Behaviors can be decoded. It's just a matter of knowing it's like being a detective, looking for the signs and seeing how can we make sure that we figure out what this behavior is. And there's no new behaviors. All of these behaviors are being recycled. So really taking that into consideration. Empowerment and voice. Give students opportunities to make choices and express, sorry, it's blocking me, and express their needs. And I think that micro schools are well known for this, that we do believe in student agency and we want children to have a voice. We want young people to have a voice. So this is, I feel like it's almost embedded into most micro schools already, which is great. Cultural humility and belonging. So prioritizing cultural humility over cultural competence by centering others' lived experiences, valuing and respecting diverse knowledge, traditions, and perspectives without assuming expertise over their realities. Engage in lifelong self-reflection to create spaces where all students feel seen and valued. There's a typo there. It's okay. Uh, but really stepping into that space of saying, I don't know your full lived experience, nor can I, because I'm not you. But can I step into a place of empathy? Yes, absolutely. And I can honor your life's journey and I can sit and hold space for you. So I think sometimes we kind of assume that we know, and that assumption is actually pretty hurtful because there's no way that we can possibly know someone's journey, right? But we can sit and we can hold space. Staff wellness matters. Again, all of these are so incredibly important, but if educators are not being well taken care of, if they are not practicing self-care and reflection, which are essential, there's no way to sustain this type of trauma-informed practice or approach because it is heavy and you are holding space, but also a really good way of seeing it is to observe and not absorb. And that's what a lot of therapists do, which, I am not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I am a teacher. I am an educator. I am a micro school founder. I'm a parent, right? My background is all in education. However, like most of you, I think it could be very easy to absorb when our students share something with us or our children are going through something, we absorb it. And so that actually doesn't do us good in the long run. Like we have to learn how to observe and then kind of let that go, be in that space and then, okay, we can move forward. Yeah, self-care, very important. Trauma informed is a lens It's not a strategy. So trauma-informed care is not just a set of interventions, but a way of seeing and understanding students through the lens of compassion and healing. And it's almost as if you have, put on a pair of glasses and now you're able to have this amazing insight and this amazing view of your students because of all of this, because you're connecting, because you're treating behavior as communication, you're decoding, you're empowering them. You have this cultural humility. You're taking care of yourself. You're observing, not absorbing, right? So all of these different ways provide a beautiful lens. Last two, intentional language and inclusive practices. So we need to be mindful of language or activities that may exclude or trigger students. I think about, donuts with dad or muffins with mom. And a lot of our students are, they have experienced being in the foster care system, or maybe they are adopted, or maybe they have no father at home. The father is absent. And we kind of treat these things as the norm, like, oh, we've always had donuts with dad or muffins with mom. And in reality, that could be very triggering and hurtful for the child. So how do we create these inclusive, mindful activities? Maybe it's providing an alternative, like maybe a web of support, or having like champions in my life, celebrations, things like that. And you can get really creative, but it does offer those students who are feeling already left out and lonely and isolated because of their experiences. It gives them an opportunity to participate. So maybe they might invite their grandpa or like a really close family friend, or maybe, someone else, right? So even thinking about family-centric assignments, such as like the family tree, like, oh, let's go ahead and create a family tree and like bringing your baby pictures. Sometimes kids don't have any context for their family tree, right? Their family of origin. They might not have any baby pictures. Reading books about orphans, like maybe we can find terms that are going to not be so hurtful. So lots of intentional language and inclusive practices to ensure all students feel valued. And lastly, safe and supportive environments. So designing a soothing space with calm corners. I mentioned the teepee. If there's any type of kids really love like Christmas lights, they like that whole aesthetic for the most part, or you can ask them what they like, maybe calming music, snacks. We have a snack stash. And if kids are wanting, a pick me up, or they can go and get a snack, water that's available, right, to support students' well-being. So a predictable, inclusive environment fosters safety and nervous system regulation. A child knows what to expect when they enter your micro school, or if you're a parent, they know what to expect at home, right? There's predictability, it's safe, it's structured, it's secure. I'm going to pause for any questions if anyone has questions.
I hadn't seen any come through the chat yet. We'll see if anyone wants to
Okay.
post some,
All
but
right.
I think, oh, this is all so important. So many reminders. I feel like people are starting to now refer to your adults instead of your mom and dad. And I think there's more inclusive language that's becoming more widespread. But, but yeah, there's so many great points.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, I'll continue, and if anything comes through, be happy to chime in here.
Sure.
Alrighty, so why this matters, right? The need for change. So just looking at chronic stress, and we know that it rewires the brain. It makes it more difficult for students to focus, process information, and regulate emotions. A trauma-informed educator or parent understands these challenges and intentionally creates a learning environment that promotes healing, strengthens executive functioning, and fosters safety, connection, and empowerment. When students' needs go unmet, it impacts their ability to learn, connect, and thrive. By embracing trauma-informed and restorative approaches, we move beyond discipline and toward healing, fostering emotional regulation, resilience, and a sense of belonging. Every child deserves an environment where they feel safe, supported, and empowered to reach their full potential. All right, we are going to have a little bit of a science lesson. So, what happens in the brain? When a child experiences stress, their amygdala takes control, shutting down logical reasoning and activating survival mode. Understanding this response helps shift our perspective from punishment to support. So, if you see the brain, we know that our prefrontal cortex is responsible for so much. This is considered like our higher thinking brain. Lots of regulation is happening there, right? And then our amygdala and hippocampus. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you like, if you could see let me see. I'm going to do it really fast. But if you could see my hand, right? This was the hand model of the brain created or designed by Dr. Dan Siegel. And so essentially he said that this is like the brain stem. So if you literally put your hand up, this is like the brain stem, right? And if you just put your thumb like that, this is your amygdala. So this is your lower thinking brain. And then up here, it's your higher thinking brain, right? So if your prefrontal cortex folds over like that, it creates like this protective cover. And it's amazing because you are a lot more regulated, you feel safe, you feel secure. However, maybe something triggered you and literally you flip your lid. And now this amygdala, this is what is in control now. The lower, the primal thinking, the reptilian or lizard brain is what has taken over. And so it's very difficult when you're trying to have a conversation with a student, or maybe you're with your child, you're just trying to reason, but the reasoning is not going through because they're not thinking with their higher thinking brain. They're thinking with the lower thinking brain. So they're kind of, really needing to go back into that regulated state. All right, so what does this all mean, and how do we notice in these behaviors? So if a child is in a state of fight, the child may become aggressive, argumentative, or defiant. I'm so sorry, I did not read this part. When a child experiences stress, okay, yeah, no. When a child experiences stress, their amygdala takes control, shutting down logical reasoning and activating survival mode. Understanding this response helps shift our perspective from punishment to support. Okay, so if we know that there's an inability to actually receive the information that you are communicating or trying to communicate, then we need to figure out a better way. So if a child is in a state of fight and they are aggressive and argumentative and defiant, they might yell, hit, or refuse to comply because their brain perceives a threat. So it's no different than maybe you saying like, okay, it's time to turn off your iPad and wash your hands and we're going to have dinner. And then boom, their brain interprets that as a threat and it all goes haywire, right? So how can we do it in a way where that might not happen, right? Can we transition a little bit better? Can we start prepping? Is there a timer that we could use? What are some ways that we can help mitigate some of that feeling? Flight. The child may try to escape, avoid, or withdraw. This can look like running away, shutting down, or getting distracted. There's a little boy I know, and he elopes. And he actually told his mom, when I elope or when I run and I see my teacher's face mad like this, I don't go back until I see the other teacher's face happy. So you watch your face, literally, like your facial expressions can make or break a child, right? Freeze. The child becomes stuck, unable to respond. They might seem zoned out, nonverbal, or frozen in place. And we've all seen that. We ask, what is wrong with you? Why did you do that? There's no response because the child is literally frozen and they might not know why they did why they did what they did, and they don't know how to respond. And those are scary questions for them. So we have to again find better ways. Fawn. The child seeks to appease or please others to avoid conflict. They may become overly agreeable, overly helpful, or people pleasing at their own expense. And this happens a lot of times if you have an emotionally immature, authoritarian type of parent. So it's a parent, a lot of, especially single parents, it's a lot of pressure, first of all, to be a single parent, to be a parent in general, but to be a single parent, and the parent might, go ahead and yell, and the child doesn't know if they're safe. And so, because of that, they have learned that the love might be conditional. It's not like this unconditional love, it's only gained through performing. If you perform, then you get my love. If you do what I want, if you are able to solve those equations, then you're good. But if not, then there's a problem. So then they grow up to be adults who people please, right? How can we, again, help change the narrative? Because we don't want kids, we don't want our kids, to experience this. We don't want our students to experience this.
Lizette, I'm gonna pause you right there because we've got a few questions coming through.
Sure.
So, so when students have behaviors that are negative or they're acting out at school, what are some strategies for helping the other student navigate the difficult behaviors? One of the attendees had mentioned that there's a divorce going on, and then this student is impacting the other students negatively, and the founder or educator is unsure what's the appropriate way to navigate these difficult behaviors amongst students.
Right. And I totally hear that because one student can go ahead and bring down the morale of the whole community.
Yep.
And I think explicitly teaching empathy versus sympathy is very important because that child in that moment, especially if there's a divorce going on, that child is so dysregulated. The environment is now so out of control. So that child will most likely want to be seeking control by any means possible, and it's very, very common. I mean, when things are so uncontrollable, forcing something to be in your control feels a whole lot more safe, even if it's disruptive to everybody else. So I think providing language to students and saying like, hey, our friend here is having a little bit of a rough time. Can we go ahead and you know, like hold space for him? It depends on the age, right? It depends
Hmm.
on where they are. But just as an example, can we hold space? We have a student who's on the spectrum, and she will yell. She will sometimes make us late for events. And our students have so much compassion for her, and they understand she's not trying to give them a hard time. She genuinely is having a hard time. And I think when we reframe it in that way, it makes all the difference in the world. Is that child going to find a safe haven at his micro school and know that no matter what, he's unconditionally loved and cared for and seen and heard and value? Or is it also going to be one of those things where his home life is kind of in, up and
In
up in arms?
flux. Yep.
flux. It's very, I'm sure it feels chaotic for his heart. And then he goes to school and it's more chaos, right? So just trying to figure that out. And there's no perfect solution, but it literally is just providing language and explicitly teaching empathy versus sympathy. And empathy is, there's a short little video in a second, but empathy is going deeper and saying, I will sit here with you in the pain. And maybe that looks like an exercise, an art exercise. How are you feeling today? Or if there's zones of regulation, having one of those charts up, the red, it's like you feel out of control. And then, so it's all different colors. And then maybe kind of, a code word or just something between the facilitator or guide or teacher, like, hey, how are you feeling? Like, red. Today's red, and maybe he doesn't want to talk about it, but then that person knows, okay, I have a heads up that this is how my student is feeling.
Yeah, that's very helpful because it's so challenging to balance the needs of the whole when there is an individual student and you're working in such small classrooms where people, it feels almost like a family in these schools than it feels like, I guess a traditional school environment that a lot of us were used to.
And I think in families, right? In families, when one person is feeling down, it has an effect on the whole family. And I think it's very akin to micro schools. If one person is feeling a certain way, um, making sure that we are teaching our kids so that we are all trauma informed, because that child is not going to, the parents are not going to be going through their divorce, for his whole existence.
Hmm.
Like it's a season, it's a time in space, it's right now. So saying, like, I see you and I'm so sorry, but here in this place, you're gonna be okay and you're welcomed and you have a seat at the table always.
Hmm. That's great. And so do you speak with your students from day one in developing this? And I suppose it's regular periodic check-ins and reminders about this, especially when you have students on the spectrum and those that aren't.
Exactly. So we have students who are neurotypical and neurodivergent all together. And so there's some behaviors that each group, exhibits. And everyone, we're learning how to, it's a microcosm of the world. We're learning how to live and be. So it's a co-learning, co-healing space. And that's safe for everyone.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a quick video about the hand.
It started with a simple but effective idea, a way to visualize our rising emotions and help restore our calm, keeping our cool when flipping our lids. It's a hand model of the brain, the brainchild of Dr. Daniel Siegel, and here's how it works. Put your thumb in the middle of your palm and curl your fingers over the top. Now you have a model of the brain. Lift your fingers up and raise your thumb. That's the inner brainstem represented by your palm and wrist. The brainstem controls basic body functions like breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. Put your thumb back down. That's the approximate location of the limbic area, most notably the amygdala, which helps to regulate emotions and our fight, flight, freeze response. Now, curl your fingers back over the top, and your prefrontal cortex, which allows us to think critically, predict consequences, control impulses, and do other executive functions, is in place. The frontmost part of the brain helps us rationally manage the amygdala and brainstem areas. But when our emotions start to rise, maybe someone's pushed your last button, or you perceive a threat or danger, our amygdala overrides the prefrontal area and we can flip our lids, losing our cool and acting in ways that can be scary to others. By visualizing our lid flipping and noticing when our emotions are rising, we can take a break or a deep breath and work to calm ourselves. giving our brainstem a chance to regulate our body and allowing us to actually change what the brain does and return to the clearer thinking of the prefrontal cortex. That's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and as a learning tool for our children.
Alrighty, I hope that was helpful. It's helpful to show even like younger students. Let me see. So I've seen kids even as young as 4 years old using the hand model. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's
great.
really great. It's a great share. I'm going to share it with other people. Absolutely.
Yes. I'm trying to. Oh, okay. So let's. So sorry here. Okay, so decoding big behaviors. Robyn Gobbel is a therapist, and she really has taken the time to decode what she calls big baffling behaviors. And sometimes they are baffling, even to me. Like I don't really understand what this is. And it was because I had a lack of understanding as a foster parent that I started doing so much of this research and work on my own because I wanted to understand. I didn't want to just be scared of the behaviors that were uncommon to me. What if we looked beyond the behavior? Every behavior is a form of communication of an unmet psychological need. I said that previously. I'm saying it again. It is worth repeating. We need to know that instead of asking, what's wrong with this child? We could reframe it to what happened to this child. So if we see a kid who is seemingly defiant, they're most likely in survival mode. For some reason, and we don't have to know the reason. For some reason, their body feels unsafe and they might lash out and they might say, nope, I don't want to do this. But it's actually not even personal. It's something that is going on within their own bodies. And so our job is really to sit, to hold space, and provide that connection that they are so longing for. They won't know how to verbalize that, but they actually need it so much in order to regulate their nervous system. They might be labeled as hard-headed. And again, they're seeking control most likely. When things are out of control, children will seek to gain control by any means necessary. And it kind of reminds me of the student that was mentioned earlier. And we can use a few approaches. One of the approaches is PACE. So this is a small but powerful shift in our mindset that can actually change everything. So PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. I'm going to go with that example of the student who his parents are going through a divorce. Okay, so using pace in daily interactions. A playful tone can disarm tension. Acceptance reassures a child they are loved. Curiosity helps uncover root causes, and empathy validates emotions. So right now, if anyone, I think they could unmute, right? If anyone would like to
Yeah, they
unmute,
absolutely can.
let's put this into practice. So Whitney has shared, or in the comments, right? There was a founder whose student is kind of displaying some challenging behaviors and maybe being disruptive to the learning environment. How could we approach this with playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy? And I'm going to go ahead and I would love to hear if anyone wants to chime in. And if not, that's totally okay too. I'll start with playfulness. So I think what I would try if I saw that the child, and it also depends. So I don't know the situation, but maybe that child is being really loud, right? Like attention seeking. I would actually try to connect in a playful way. So maybe joking around. And again, I don't know what grade level. I guess for this example, I'll say, maybe they're in middle school. The student is in middle school. I might ask about like for acceptance, I might say something to make that child feel reassured. Like, hey, I saw that you, did so amazing, like kicking that ball during lunch or something. And then curiosity, um, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Empathy, depending on what the child shares, right? Stepping into that space. So it's very simple, but all of those points are points of connection. And then that's when that child will probably end up self-regulating or at least borrowing our co-regulation and then able to come back to a place where he doesn't feel like he has to act out or he has to control or he has to XYZ, whatever the case is. Okay, this is a very short little clip. I know we're running out of time on empathy versus sympathy.
So, what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection, sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy: perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth; staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do; recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. And I absolutely love that clip. I think it's exactly what so many of our students need. And I know that we're at time. So there was a few slides that I did not get to, but please, on your own time, go through them. There's also the accompanying workbook, and you could kind of do some exercises, and there's a lot of role-playing scenarios that you can, ranging from a child that has anxiety to maybe a lack of impulse control. So there's a ton there for you, but I'm just so glad that I got a chance to share a little bit with you today, and hope this was helpful.
I think it was so helpful. It's amazing. Like I was talking to you earlier, was um, we had we're having a speaker from MIT Systems Awareness on compassionate systems, and everything that we were speaking about really rings true to what you're speaking about and how we build our systems, how we build our education to 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 include everyone, to make people feel good and to be comforted so that we can have a better world. So it's it's really great. Thank you so much, Lizette.
I'm so glad to be here. And again, if you guys have any questions or you want to go more in depth, I'm hosting a workshop on March 20th. That's actually, it was going to be a 2-hour PD. I think it's looking more like a 3-hour PD. And the reason for that is that I really want it to be a lot more interactive. This one, the intention was there, everything was meant to be interactive, but we just didn't get a chance due to a lack of time. But there's so much content, there's so much here. And again, I am not a therapist, a counselor, a psychiatrist, psychologist. However, I am a teacher at heart. And so this is literally just a work of love. And I'm so glad to be able to share with you.
Wonderful. Well, Lizette, I can share that information with the recording tomorrow to everyone who participated. And if there's additional interest, perhaps we can also host another one later in the fall or next year. So thank you everyone for attending. We have a couple of upcoming events. We have another webinar that's coming up next week, where we're talking a little bit about accountability and accreditation. Is it necessary for micro schools? Tony's going to be hosting that. There's going to be a couple of other people from various micro school as well. Siri Fisk, the founder of our micro schools network, she's talking about evidence to convince your family that micro schools are a great decision on the 3rd of April. And then we also have our conference coming up May 8th and 9th, and we'd love to see everyone there. So, lots of exciting things forthcoming. We're here for any questions. If you have feedback or need more information, then yeah, I'm happy to respond. And I'll be sending the recording on Friday and then some of the resources and other things that Lizette's was talking about today. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lizette. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.